Welcome to the Business Owners Council, Legal Issues from Growth to Exit.
Hello and welcome to the Business Owners Council, Legal Issues from Growth to Exit. This is the show where Florida business owners get practical legal strategies for building stronger companies, from avoiding costly disputes to scaling smart to maximizing your business's value. My name is Kevin Rosenquist, and in each episode, we're going to sit down with Kevin BRIC, founder of BRIC Business Law, an Inc. 5000 company itself, to talk through the exact playbook his firm uses to help businesses thrive. Kevin and his team have guided Florida companies through litigation, transactions, employment issues, and growth challenges of every kind for the past 10 years. Whether you're growing fast, facing a tough decision, or preparing for the sale of your company, this podcast will give you the tools and insights you need to move forward with confidence. Kevin, welcome.
Thank you. Great to be on with you.
All right, so I gave you quite the introduction there. Now I'm going to have to ask you a bunch of questions, so you've got to start talking. Why do you say that legal strategy can actually accelerate business growth, not just prevent problems?
Yeah, a lot of sort of stagnant or status quo type companies, they look at the legal function as being sort of a defensive function. But when you look at growing companies and companies that are actually getting ready to exit, they recognize that legal advice really helps them in a couple key areas. So one is risk mitigation. Anytime you're working with investors or banks, even your own employees, potential buyers, they all want predictability. And so having a strong legal foundation actually gives them that. And it's also, of course, important in the due diligence process for buyers to see that the company is well run. And then, just kind of with internal speed and certainty, businesses that have a strong legal function, they move faster with clear agreements, they make faster decisions. And so it just helps them be able to move confidently forward.
Interesting point there you made on that one about the perception of your business, just being a little more maybe legit or a little bit more professional, having that legal counsel in place. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's what we see too, is, a lot of business owners, when they're looking to take that next step, that's something that's very important to them, is to make sure it's run professionally and, best practices are being followed internally. And of course, the legal function is one of the ways to get that done.
So give me a quick win area where a business owner could make a legal improvement to boost growth.
Yeah, one thing in general is to just have written agreements in place that actually fit the business. So like one issue I see with smaller companies or startups is that they may try to cut corners by using like AI or an online form that they think makes sense, but maybe it doesn't, or maybe it makes things worse. So I'll just give you a quick example. One time I was representing a restaurant owner in a partnership, and he and his partner, before they came and saw us, they drafted a partnership agreement, and then they formed an LLC, and then they did a bunch of things on their own, and then they got in a dispute, and all of the documents really pointed in a bunch of different directions. It was very unclear what they were trying to do and what they did do, and so it made their business basically deadlocked because they had kind of chosen the wrong forms and entered into things on their own. So I'd say just having agreements in place that are clear, that are a good fit, they lead to faster execution, and then you kind of avoid all of these issues with deadlock and things going wrong.
Yeah, that sounds awful. Well,
Yeah.
piggybacking off of that, talking about partnership agreements, how do partnership agreements or shareholder agreements factor into scaling and growth, into this scaling and growth legal model?
Yeah, so like shareholder agreements or partnership agreements, these are the agreements at the leadership level, right? So you're talking about, making sure that the board and executives and partners, they're all rowing in the same direction. So having those agreements in place help define, the responsibilities of each person, giving them, establishing their rights to big things. Like, for instance, how do you bring on a new partner or investor, or, what decisions do you need, like a voting requirement for? So like if you had a couple partners and or two of them wanted to open a new location and take out a $500,000 loan to do that, like, does everybody need to vote to do that? Or is it okay to have a majority, or what things are in place to allow them to do that? And so having like a clear operating agreement and partnership agreement, it allows people to understand what needs to be done to move things forward strategically. And so it's like they won't have to be like building the plane while they're trying to fly it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. No, that makes sense. And are employment policies, like, are those part of this as well, as part of what you help people with? And I mean, the employment policies often feel bureaucratic, like they feel kind of stiff and all that, but do they support growth as well?
They do. So if you're looking now, not at the leadership level, but kind of internally within the company, and you're talking about how do companies grow by expanding with more employees and direct those things, it does feel bureaucratic when you have like, kind of the startup phase where people are doing things a little more creatively and they're figuring out, how to get their job done. And then as you grow and get bigger, you've got to have like certain best practices in place. You've got to
Hmm.
have duties allocated accordingly to different people. And then that does, when you put those policies in place, sometimes those early employees feel like there is a lot of bureaucracy there, but it's really outweighed by the benefits of having things done consistently at the organizational level. So being able to have employment agreements and policies and procedures all in place, again, it kind of goes back to that theme of helping a business, like everybody rowing in the same direction.
Hmm.
And so even though it can feel a little bureaucratic as companies grow, that's a really important step to make sure that, again, everybody's kind of moving in the same direction consistently.
Yeah, it becomes like a bro. We used to be cool here, like this used to be
Right.
chill and fun. And I actually know somebody who used to work at a brewery here. I'm in Colorado, and when they first started, it was just yeah, it was just a bunch of bros just hanging out, brewing beer and having fun. But they grew, and eventually they had to kind of put these policies in place. And a lot of people, who had been there didn't like it, but it was the right decision.
Yeah, I mean, when you've got the more people you have, the more complex organizations get, right? And so
Yeah.
when you've got certain best practices, or people have not disagreements, but different ways of doing things, you want to make sure that there is predictability in how people should be doing their jobs and how they interact together, just to make sure things are done the best way they can. And so that when we're talking about like businesses that are growing or scaling or looking at potentially exiting, it's very important that you have those things in place so there's a good cadence of people doing their jobs and doing it correctly.
Yeah, when it's just Thunderdome, it can get a little messy.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. When we spoke earlier, you said something about contracts being leveraged as sales tools. Can you unpack that a little bit?
When you have a sales team, or you have a sales process and you're prospecting with potential customers or clients, you want to have um, sales agreements that are already in place, that are professional, that are reasonable, that can help build trust with new customers and also with vendors and other people you interact with, because it shows credibility. And if your salespeople and your sales team actually know kind of where the lines are with regard to your legal risks and protocols, and they're able to communicate that in a clear way, then that really accelerates a lot of the deal process on the sales side, and it helps you shorten negotiation cycles. And that's another kind of key to growth. Or if you compare that to a company, for instance, that their sales team is always having to negotiate all the terms, and there's really no guidance on what's kind of standard or what's important to leadership, that creates risks, but it also just makes things run slowly and with less confidence and clarity. And so
Hmm.
using a well-defined sales agreement really does help the sales team do their job better and faster.
I've talked to a lot of entrepreneurs, founders over my years, and a lot of things slip through the cracks because a lot of times they're not necessarily. A lot of times they're first time entrepreneurs, first time business owners. Maybe they didn't even go to business school. They're just kind of they've got a great idea. They're moving forward with it. And one thing that seems to be an issue is protecting intellectual property. How does this work, and how might it affect the ability to grow a company if you fail to protect your intellectual property?
Yeah, that's a good thing to hit on, because yeah, like, so intellectual property obviously is a very important part of tech companies and creative companies, but actually it also can be a very important part of kind of like what people call like the boring businesses now, which are they're attractive, but people don't necessarily associate having IP with those businesses, and they do. So they may have their internal playbook of how they run their business. They might have business plans and other things that could be protectable trade secrets, and so it's really important for those things to be documented, and then also for there to be protections in place, whether that's protections from procedurally, like what's password protected internally, or just agreements with your employees on what they can and can't share. And so this is a really important part because no business really should ignore this. Um, when they're working with their lawyers really need to dig in and figure out and define what is their IP, how it should be protected procedurally in the business, and also, what agreement should be in place. Because when people come in as strategic buyers and they're looking to buy a business, this is something that can really set it apart. Is kind of like having that internal playbook of how do we run, this plumbing company that makes it so different than others. And so that's a really, really important thing to be thinking about for businesses that are growing, and also businesses that are growing to exit. And so, yeah, that IP piece is key.
I would imagine too, with smaller companies or even some startups, that they might just not think they need certain business documents, certain legal documents, whether that's a board of directors and corporate governance documents, things like that. How do you coach them when they kind of shrug their shoulders or blow off some of these things?
Yeah, I mean, it is true that businesses, they can operate without some of those formalities, and one of the issues is the longer they do that, or the more they do that, the more they kind of carry risks that they don't need to carry.
Mhm.
So we've talked a lot about growing businesses that are trying to scale. So on one hand, building in systems and processes and infrastructure at the corporate level, the board level, is really important. As I've kind of mentioned before, when you've got like outside parties coming to look at a business and see how well run it is. But then there's kind of like a flip side of the corporate governance documentation, which is really important if you've got a business owner that maybe there's creditors of a business and things have gone wrong, and the business maybe runs out of money. And so those creditors, what they'll try to do is go after the owners. And one factor that prevents that, or that minimizes that risk, is if the business is run with corporate formalities and it's actually run like a separate entity, then that can be a factor in preventing what's called piercing the corporate veil by a creditor. So it's not just about like making the business look pretty and run well, but it's also like an asset protection strategy, is to have all those corporate documents in place. It actually is particularly important for like that small business, because it's just like you said, it's like a lot of times they don't really follow formalities. They kind of like, they mix their bank accounts together, or they write themselves a check for something and this and that. And they really have to avoid that, because it creates a danger on that credit side. But it just doesn't look like a well-run company with enterprise value, which is kind of what a lot of people are trying to build.
Let's talk BRIC Business Law, right? So someone comes in, sits down with you. What kind of, things do you ask to figure out if you're like outside general counsel is a good fit with them? What's that process look like?
Yeah, well, one thing is, of course, like understanding the business itself, how well it runs, what it does, what are its relationships, where it's trying to go, what the goals are. So you're trying to figure out where the risks are,
Mhm.
essentially, because you want to try to minimize those risks, help the business run better. So those, generally those areas are like contracts, employment issues, collections, corporate, all the things we've been talking about. Um, and the challenge is, sometimes when you're kind of like the outside general counsel and you're relying on the business owner to come in and tell you what the problems are, what the issues are, you have to really rely on their interpretation of it. So one thing we've tried to do, which I think has been very helpful, is to be sort of more integrated into the business. So the more we can be on like leadership calls, or establish like a cadence of topics to address with a business owner, like on a schedule. So, like for instance, over the course of maybe 12 months, every month we're going to go through a different topic of their business. So we've talked about month one, corporate documents; month two, employment; month three, real estate leases, whatever those things are. So you have this like systematic way of tackling every single legal risk area in their business. And so those two things have been pretty successful for us, is like trying to get a little more integrated in the business than a regular attorney or law firm. And then on top of that, having like a regular schedule of topics to review. And so those two things have been a really good way to kind of tackle those general counsel issues of, typically having to rely on an owner to tell you where the issues are. It's more like prescriptive than reactive, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think that would make sense to everybody. It's just a matter of actually implementing it, right?
Right, right.
Yeah. All right, so we've talked about all these things, these documents, these procedures, all that stuff. So how does all of this add value for a future sale of a company?
Well, in the context of selling a business, like buyers, they'll pay a premium for businesses that are like deal ready, meaning they've got all these clean contracts and HR files, all the IP rights and governance is in place, because that reduces the risk of an issue coming out of due diligence on the deal side, and also, a buyer having something go wrong after the transaction that was, a hidden issue in the business before they bought it. So basically, having these well-run, clean companies with regard to their legal documents really reduces risk for buyers.
We'll finish up here. If there's a Florida business owner listening, watching us right now, and is going, "Oh, fine, all right, I'll go ahead and do this." Geesh, what's the best place to start? What's step one?
Well, I think your mindset as an owner has to be, you have to look at like legal planning as an investment in your business. You have to have that solid foundation. And then, from that standpoint, I would say, find a law firm that you like and trust that specializes in these issues, and then just get them integrated into your business on a regular basis so that they can understand what's going on. They can see, what legal planning needs to be done. And it's not just like a one-time event, but it's an ongoing process of basically vetting, addressing risks, and making sure they're addressed well. So those are, I think, really good ways to make sure your business is compliant, you've mitigated risks, and then you're getting ready for a successful future.
Love it. A lot of great information in this episode, Kevin. Our first one. Thank you so much for that. And thank you for joining us for the Business Owners Council with Kevin BRIC. If you're a Florida business owner looking to scale with confidence, Kevin and his team at BRIC Business Law can help you build a strong legal foundation and avoid costly missteps and some of the issues that we talked about today. Visit bricbusinesslaw.com to learn more. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and leave us a review. We got lots more awesome content coming your way. Kevin, great having our first conversation here. Looking forward to many more.
Thank you. Thank you, Kevin, for having me on.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.